Good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to the June 6th Committee of the Whole. I'd like to call this meeting to order with a roll call from the Madam Clerk.
Schultz, DeBoer, Cruz, Harding,
Here.
Ganfield,
Here.
Sires,
Here.
Dunn, here.
All right, thank you. Well, for the Committee of the Whole, we've scheduled 55 minutes for a City Council training update from the Allers and Cooney legal advisors. And without further ado, we welcome you. Thanks for coming up and look forward to hearing what you got to say. Oh, Kevin, you have an introduction?
I do.
All right. City Attorney Kevin Rogers for an intro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight we're going to have a couple representatives of the Allers and Cooney law firm give us some information, some good pointers on several topics that are important to the council. Mike Galloway's here and Maria Brownell. Allers and Cooney are municipal law experts from Des Moines. They represent public entities all over the state, and the information they're going to give us tonight I think will be very valuable. So I'll turn it over to those two. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Welcome. Thanks for coming up.
Thank you. Well, hello. I'm Maria Brownell. I'm a shareholder in the Allers and Cooney Municipal Division, and so my practice ranges from advising on day-to-day matters to more specialized matters as well. And so I'm just so thrilled to be able to be with you this evening. And we have a lot of material to cover. So I was asked to just give an overview of a lot of those topics that you all, that create the framework that you all operate within every day. And so I'm going to start with our standard disclaimer. This is, that said, this is a very broad range of subjects, and so nothing within this presentation should be construed as specific legal advice. Of course, you'll want to, as I'll probably say multiple times this evening, so many things are very factually sensitive. So you really want to visit with legal counsel on specific questions and legal issues that you may encounter. So, topics to cover today. The big picture and city council and staff role. We start, with a really bird's eye view on that, and then we'll talk about some best practices and options for how to work as a unit, and then we'll get into some really specific topics, including conflicts, ex parte communications, and open meetings. So, the big picture. The city of Cedar Falls operates under the mayor-council form of government, and that allows the council to provide for a city manager and prescribe the manager's powers and duties. That comes from Iowa Code Section 372.4. And so in implementing that, the city has established by ordinance the role of a city manager. But the power of the city is vested in the city council as an entire unit, except as otherwise provided by state law. So Iowa law doesn't vest any power in individual council members, okay? The council operates as a whole by specific action, motion, ordinance, resolution. The exception for this is there are specific powers that mayors do have under Iowa law and city ordinance. Those are those are very specific, narrow circumstances. City council members individually, however, do not. So the mayor of the city and the presiding officer of the city council, and under city code, council sets policies, city administrator implements those policies. So I just outlined here the language of the code that and essentially captures the mayor's role. The mayor shall supervise and evaluate the performance of the city administrator with input from the council. The mayor gives direction as necessary concerning the function of city departments specifically, and can call for special reports from time to time. The council sets that policy guidance that's then implemented by staff and by and through the city administrator. The city council adopts broad goals, objectives, and program performance measures, and that then in turn guides the roles and responsibilities of the city administrator in developing and building that annual budget, capital improvement program, and administration of city projects and programs. Again, kind of referring to your city code that establishes your framework, the city administrator is covered in section 2.218, and the city administrator's powers and duties are outlined as as Chief Administrative Officer of the city, and again, responsible to Mayor and Council for the management of city affairs that are all placed within the city administrator's charge. So your authority, as I said, comes from actions taken as part of a whole city council, not actions as an individual. Council is responsible for establishing policies. Implementing those policies is left to the city administrator with direct supervision by the mayor. So in doing so, individual council members operating as a unit, acting individually, don't have the authority to directly implement any policy changes by individually going to city departments or staff members. That could create confusion, mixed messaging, and can create liability for the city or for an individual council member. Individual council members, as you know, don't have the authority to bind the city. So as our Iowa Supreme Court has said, if an individual officer were to act in bad faith or knowingly exceed any of those sort of authority guidelines, that can result in personal liability for damages. So generally speaking, that is the general framework that city code has established and that state law establishes, and the sort of outer perimeters of how the council operates. Are there any questions about that general big picture?
Any council questions? Looks like we're good to go on. Thank you.
Great. So then let's move into some best practices and options, tips and strategies on how to work effectively as a unit. Council takes action as a body and works together to achieve common objectives. So one way to ensure an efficient and effective movement in the same direction is to identify shared direction and goal setting, which the city council does. And provide policy direction to the city administrator that stems from that goal setting. The city administrator's role is to implement those policies and to do so through department staff and the excellent talent that you all have within each of those departments in the city. Annual goal setting meetings are that opportunity to really identify the priorities and provide that policy direction. The city's work over the next year really focuses in on those priorities that are identified at goal setting time. So if you respect that process, you'll get results from that process. And just ensuring that you don't allow yourselves to get off track. We find is, always possible as humans, but to the extent possible to keep and confine your actions through the rest of that year to really the direction that you established at your goal setting sessions. Allowing the city's professional staff to implement council's priorities is another best practice that we see. Recognizing and valuing that incredible expertise and experience that staff has and can provide is a great tool and resource. If there are specific concerns, best practice is to share those with the city administrator rather than going directly to a department head or staff member. As I said, you are one of 7, and that's so kind of having that direction and that channel and allowing the city administrator to perform his or her role really is a best practice and a most efficient way to move towards those policy objectives. Recognizing that each member of the council is entitled to their own opinion and an opportunity to express that opinion. Disagreements are going to happen. They are normal, they are inevitable, and they are ultimately can be a very productive and good thing. But recognizing that each member of the council is going to have potentially a difference of opinion down the road in some way in terms of policy making and objective and goal setting that's okay, and that's a good thing. But just recognizing that and respecting those differences is the goal to put you on a road to efficiency. There are council committees that make recommendations to city council. Council committees are an excellent tool to help facilitate implementation of policy goals. Council committees, just like city council, are subject to open meetings laws. All final action, regardless of what action or what discussion is had at committee, must be taken by the full city council. Committees are authorized only to bring recommendations forward to the full council. And when council acts as a unit as city council, that is city action, not the action taken perhaps as a member of a committee. Questions about some of those high-level items?
Going once. All right. Looks like we're all good to go.
Great. I'll pause here and let Mike have an opportunity if he has anything he wants to add on those two sets. Okay, great. Okay, so now I want to get into some of the more detailed topics for today. The first one I want to start with is one that will come up for for any of you or many of you or all of you at some point in time, and that is conflicts of interest. Naturally, as part of a community and then also as part of a policy-making body, conflicts can happen, can and do happen. And so the question is, where does the conflicts law come from? And what is the framework that should guide your decision-making as an individual council member or committee member when those conflicts do arise? So conflicts of interest really come from 4 different general sources. One is common law. When I say common law, I mean law that existed maybe through the courts. Maybe it's law that trickled down through the years from, England and old law, that was adopted without, with courts rather than by legislatures. When I say common law, I also mean laws that were codified later. And so some of the laws you see in Iowa Chapter 362, Iowa Code Chapter 68B, and even trickled into city policies really came from, and so common law, city common law kind of comes from Iowa Code Chapter 362 comes from
Yeah. You'll see about 9.
Looks like we are back. So without further ado, we're going to continue on with the common law section of the conflicts of interest.
Great, thank you. So, conflict of interest rules are set by courts in the common law realm, and the Iowa Supreme Court has a couple of nuggets that I wanted to share with you on that kind of give you just a guiding framework for what conflict rules are aimed at. Setting straight. So, conflict rules are generally based on moral principles and public policy. The conflict rules are intended to demand complete loyalty to the public and seek to avoid subjecting a public servant to a difficult and often insolvable task of deciding between a public duty and a private advantage. It's not necessary that an advantage be a financial one necessarily, as we'll talk about some of the more specific conflict rules here in a moment. It is also not required that there be showing that the official sought or gained such a result, such an advantage. It's the potential for conflict of interest that the law is designed to avoid. It's generally improper and illegal for a member of a municipal council or similar body to vote on any question in which he or she is personally interested or where his or her personal rights will be affected. So what that means is further defined by our legislature. They have given some more specific guidance. One of those places of guidance is Chapter 362. Chapter 362, the name of the game there is no self-dealing. A city officer shall not have an interest, direct or indirect, in any contract or job of work or material or the profits thereof or services to be furnished or performed for the officer's city. A contract entered into in violation of this section would be void. So that's specific language from 362.5. Now there are exceptions, and some are more or less exceptions, and some are more or less carve-outs. They're not specifically complete exceptions, but just additional guidance to help navigate those waters if and when they arise. One of those exceptions are contracts that are publicly bid. Another might be contracts that predate the election of a particular officer, but the contract is not allowed to be renewed. Another is contracts where the city has a contract with a corporation in which that city officer has an interest by reason of holding stock. If that stock is less than 5% of the outstanding stock of the corporation owned and controlled directly or indirectly by the officer or the spouse or immediate family member of that officer. So, and as you'll see, kind of a spoiler alert, many of these conflicts of interest rules are going to also apply to direct family members. Contracts, another exception is contracts for goods or services if the purchases do not exceed cumulative $6,000 per fiscal year. There are many others, but those are some of the highlights. They're the most common typically of the conflict exceptions that arise. Now, the code gives city officers the ability to determine whether a conflict exists for him or herself, and this determination is considered conclusive. The council's action isn't considered invalid due to a conflict of interest of a voting member unless that vote is decisive to the passage of a measure. But keep in mind, as I said previously, a contract is considered void where a member has a prohibited interest in that contract. So, any questions before I depart from that particular statute? I told you there's several sources, common law, 362, and now I'm about to get into 68B. Are there any questions about 362?
Maria, if I may, can you make
Yes.
a clear distinction for me? I think I may have a miscommunicated understanding. The conflict of interest for a council person, would you have to have a unique benefit from that engagement or just an interest? I mean, your screen showed just an interest, and I took it to I previously understood it to mean that you would uniquely benefit or be detrimented by that decision.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about the same thing, right? You're talking about that personal advantage or that what is personal. So unique would be a good word to use. It is specific to the individual who may have that relationship with the external contract or activity.
And for further clarity then, just as a representative citizen, if you were like many other citizens, you could still vote in that interest.
I think it depends on what we're talking about. So if you're like any other citizen, say you own land, and that's, generally, I mean, a lot of people in the city happen to own land, so that just by reason of owning land, are you, not permitted to vote on a measure that regulates land use? You kind of have to walk that back and find out what is unique about the officer's landowner status that would be, not true about every other landowner within the city. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we're talking about the same thing.
Any other questions? Good.
Could I follow up? This on? So to expand upon what he's saying there, like when we vote on Main Street, downtown provisions, we all use Main Street. It's not like it's unique to us. Or we patronize the downtown merchants, and we make decisions on zoning and codes and whatnot. So that's doesn't rise to that level. It's more of a unique scenario.
It would be a personal interest that a person has. So either by reason of financial interest, or as we'll talk about under Chapter 68B, some other ethical consideration. So when we talk about Iowa Code Chapter 68B, that is the general ethics codes chapter of our Iowa law. There are many prohibitions in 68B. One of those is outside employment or activities that involve the use of the government's time or resources to give a person an advantage or benefit that's not available to the general public. So that is one prohibition. Another would be outside employment or activities that involve the receipt of consideration, money, monetary consideration, or in kind, by a government official from someone other than the government for performing work that is a part of their duties and responsibilities in their official role. So don't take bribes. That's what that means. But whether that's monetary or in kind. Outside employment or activities that are subject to the official enforcement or control of the person during the performance of their official government duties. Now, as I mentioned before, city officials, city employees, and their family members are subject to these rules. So certain, and there are specific ethical obligations under 68B that are applicable to those family members. Immediate family members are defined as the spouse, dependent children, and of the public official or public employee. If you're prohibited from doing something, then so would your spouse or dependent children. So what are a couple of examples, some anecdotes? For example, using a city, this would be a conflict, using a city-provided iPad to run an online retail store that benefits you or a family member. So don't be selling your goods on Etsy on your city-owned iPad. Don't be selling your daughter's goods on your city-owned iPad, that kind of thing. Accepting payment from a home builder each time you approve a residential subdivision plat. That would be considered receipt of consideration from someone other than the government for work that is part of official duties as a council member. Another would be participating in a rezoning decision as a council member for property in which you personally have an interest. That would be employment or activity that is subject to the official control of the city council. So, assuming that a Chapter 68B conflict has been identified, what do you do? Well, for conflicts 1 or 2, outside employment that involves use of government time or resources to give an advantage to that person that the general public doesn't enjoy, or outside employment or activities that resolve the receipt of some sort of money or consideration, you stop doing it immediately. There is no, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Must stop the outside employment or activity. For conflict number 3, you must either stop the outside employment or activity or publicly disclose the conflict and avoid taking action that would detrimentally affect or create that benefit for the outside employment or activity. City policy is another source of conflict rules. And so that is, by city policy, there's an annual declaration of compliance that is required of each member. The city prohibits its officials from engaging in any activity, practice, or act that unlawfully conflicts with or appears to conflict with the interests of the city. This is consistent with an Iowa Supreme Court case, Wilson versus Iowa City, that it's the potential for a conflict that the law generally seeks to avoid. When in doubt, best practice is to disclose the potential conflict and do not take action on the matter. Are there any questions about conflicts? Recognizing that these are incredibly, particularly fact-sensitive questions, and they are specific to individuals, I'm happy to try to answer any questions about the material that we've covered.
Questions from any council members? Yeah, go ahead.
Is to all the councils and other elected officials that I work with is, if you do have a question and you have the advantage as the city of Cedar Falls of having in-house city attorney, you need to reach out to Kevin and find out and get an opinion. There's no reason not to do that in advance, even if you think, if you start to think that there is a conflict, get that opinion. And if Kevin will reach out to one of us if there's an additional question also, and we can get you something solid so that there is no issues. As you see and read papers and all of the different things that happen across the state, we try to avoid them up front. So that's a really good resource for the council and the mayor to use.
I have a question. So, as far as like rezoning and stuff, if you own a business within a district that's going to be rezoned, would that be considered a conflict of interest, or due to because there are other business owners there? You know what I mean?
So that question, again, it sort of spurs a series of more questions, right? That's not a real straightforward, there's not a straightforward answer to that. Is
Okay.
there a benefit that could inure to the person, or a disadvantage that can inure to the person, such that in their official role as a council member on trying to make a determination as to that rezoning, that they would be impacted? Again, there are probably a whole other host of facts that could come into play that might turn the result of that question one way or the other. And so very, very much highly encourage, in any of those situations that you reach out and obtain that legal opinion on that
So-
particular matter.
Essentially, these are a general guideline, but yet still very specific information would be needed on a case-by-case scenario as to wade through the law and see if there truly is a conflict.
Correct. And typically, I mean, I would say as a very general matter, anytime there is a rezoning and there's a property owner who sits on council who is impacted by that rezoning, I think there's at least going to be an appearance of a conflict, if not an actual conflict. So those are times where you definitely, if you're asking yourself the question, that probably is suggesting to you you're asking yourself the right question and that you should seek legal guidance, because back to Chapter 68B, the Iowa Campaign Ethics and Disclosure Board also, not only do they promulgate rules that implement those that we just walked through, but they have advisory opinions and they have decisions on specific cases. So there may be a case or advisory opinion out there specifically right on point with your situation that you want legal counsel to let you know about. So.
Thanks. Any other questions on council before we move on? All right. Looks like we're ready.
Very good.
Thanks.
So, on a completely unrelated topic, but still discussing council roles, let's talk for a minute about ex parte communications. Have any of you heard the phrase ex parte communication before?
Yes.
Yeah. So, ex parte communication generally refers to communicating with a third party about some matter that involves many different parties' interests that is before the city or the city council for a decision. And it would be communicating with that third party without the presence of other interest holders present. Originally, this concept is most familiar to the role of the courts, because you have, for example, a judge who may be overseeing a case, and they have many adverse parties, maybe two adverse parties in a case. You don't want one party to have an unfair advantage in bending a judge's ear on a matter before that judge that the other party does not have an opportunity then to supplement or add to. And that all rolls into the constitutional concept of due process. So council performs two distinct types of functions. One is a lawmaking or policy-making role, and one could be considered quasi-judicial. So quasi-judicial proceedings generally involve notice and opportunity to be heard, or a determination of rights of parties made which require the exercise of discretion in finding facts and applying the law. So as I said, the notion of prohibitions on ex parte communications really rooted in due process. That's the Fifth Amendment of the Federal Constitution and Article 1, Section 9 of the Iowa Constitution, both of which state that no person may be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And that notion is really rooted in fundamental fairness. And I think In judicial proceedings, it's very clear that you have very clear roles. You have a judge's role, you have, a part and two parties maybe who have a problem that they've brought to the courts. So, in that same vein, when council is sitting in a quasi-judicial role rather than in its policymaking or lawmaking role, those same notions apply to ensuring that everyone who is bringing some sort of adversarial or disputed matter in which there are multiple interests before council, everyone has a chance to be fully heard with the opportunity to respond. And really, again, that sort of the goal is to avoid even the appearance of unfairness. Really, just ensuring that there is trust and faith and confidence in the system that city ordinance or state law sets forth when the city council is performing its role as a quasi-judicial body. So, at a minimum, due process requires those proceedings to involve notice to the interested individuals to a particular matter, an opportunity for all those individuals to be heard, and an impartial decision maker. Ex parte communications would be one party being heard more than the other, and that could potentially lead to a biased decision maker or the appearance of a biased decision maker, which then leads to the concern of due process. So some examples of the types of things, and this is not even close to an exhaustive list. Our courts have really developed the notion of ex parte communications and when a council is performing a quasi-judicial versus lawmaking role. It's not always as clear-cut as you might think. But some of the more clear-cut examples might be rezonings and many other land use matters, contests of removal from appointed office, and appeal hearings of any kind. So anytime there's already been a decision and the appeal by city code is presented to the city council, that's another time when you might be sitting in your quasi-judicial role. So those ex parte communications should be avoided in quasi-judicial proceedings. And if communications occur, the best way to handle those is to publicly disclose those communications and give the parties an opportunity to respond or object.
So the best for this council, as an example of that, I think, because we've been through it a lot, is employee appeals. As a council, in certain instances, you sit, Kevin serves as your legal counsel. That would be a prime example of you acting as a quasi-judicial organization in reviewing an employee appeal from a disciplinary matter or from some other interpretation. And that's what we want to avoid, any ex parte discussions vis-a-vis with city staff and or with the grievant to that issue. Obviously, there's the zoning issues and things like that you're also going to sit in a quasi judicial approach. So we just want to make sure that nobody's getting an unfair advantage in or you want to have the hearings so that you can hear both sides and it's open to the public so that everyone can hear.
Quick question, if we may, and I'll open it up to council after this if they have other questions pertaining to like rezoning. If it's not in a quasi-judicial sense and more of a policy sense, such as rezoning an entire area, what would come into effect as far as ex parte in talking with the citizens and the business owners and the people in that area outside of a council meeting to kind of just get the idea, as we always want to be as informed as possible? Where does that line fall?
So are you asking about pre-rezoning action, nothing on a council agenda, maybe something that's being contemplated? Or are you talking about a rezoning that has already been initiated, maybe council-initiated rezoning? And
The latter, the
Okay.
one that would be on the agenda for some readings and stuff.
I assume, and again, facts really matter. So if it's a city-owned parcel
It would be an
only
entire,
property
let's
that's being
just say,
rezoned?
like a whole swath of land, such as a 7 to 12 block radius, let's just say. So it would affect city land, private, residential homes, public sector as far as businesses and everything. It's such as redoing, because we're in the middle of continuing to try to redo our zoning. So trying to see for myself as well where I fall.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are multiple interested parties in those situations. I think there are people who might feel one way or another on a pending rezoning, and so those communications, I think, could be considered ex parte communications if other parties who hold an interest don't have a similar opportunity to provide input or some sort of response to what you're hearing. So I think that could be a potential situation where your quasi judicial role is going to be exercised at a council meeting, and ex parte communication could be implicated. Best situation is to have everyone who has something to say or has some input they'd like to provide that in writing too, so that all council members are able to consider that at the time of the hearing, and so that the public is aware and all interested parties are aware of what that input was.
Any other council members have questions, follow up on line of thinking? Councilmember DeBur?
I think where we see that quite often is on a rezoning issue where we get emails from the public, and to reply to it would be ex parte communications. So is our best response to simply write back to the person and say that they'll forward it to the city clerk, and that way it's on file, but that it is ex parte, so I really can't communicate?
Yeah, and again, I would follow kind of whatever your normal process is. I think that's a terrific way to handle it. Definitely acknowledging receipt, letting them know that you're going to forward it along so that everyone has the opportunity to review that comment and it can be considered at the time of the rezoning. So absolutely, I think that's a fine way to handle that.
Any other questions? All right.
Excellent. Well, we've already had our questions, but to the extent you want to go back to anything we've discussed too, as you're thinking through conflicts or big picture, ex parte communications, or just your role in as a quasi judicial body, certainly feel free to pipe in. We'll talk about open meetings next, because that's another topic that arises quite frequently. Just questions regarding open meetings laws, where those rules come from, and what the left and right boundaries are to applying those laws. Iowa Code Section 21.1 expresses the intent of our Iowa Open Meetings Law, seeking to assure through a requirement of open meetings of government bodies that the basis and rationale of governmental decisions, as well as those decisions themselves, are easily accessible to the people. And really, if you think very quickly about it, it dovetails nicely into the ex parte communication discussion we just had too. It's just that openness and assurance that all government action is really, to the extent possible and to the extent necessary, that there isn't any side conversations happening that other individuals who might have an interest in policy making role or a decision outcome don't have the opportunity to participate in. Ambiguity in the construction or application of the open meetings law is supposed to be resolved in favor of openness. So when there is a question about open meetings, the courts will resolve them in favor of finding that the meeting should be held open. So that is what's called a liberal construction of that law, and it's always in favor of openness. The purpose is to prohibit secret meetings and require those meetings to be open and allow the public to be present. So what he is, but just going to the basics, what's a governmental body? As you know, city council would be a governmental body. But the law also expands governmental body to mean advisory committee, task forces, or other bodies that are created by political subdivisions such as a city council that are designed to develop and make recommendations on policy issues. So what is a meeting? There has been replete Iowa case law about the meaning of a meeting. And so, when in doubt, seek a legal opinion on this question as well. But it seems that under Iowa law, the definition of a meeting is a gathering in person or by electronic means, formal or informal, of a majority of the members of a governmental body where there is deliberation or action upon any matter within the scope of that governmental body's policy-making duties. So meetings should not include a gathering of members for purely ministerial or social purposes when there really isn't any discussion of policy or intent to avoid purposes of the law. All that said, how quickly can informal social gatherings turn into a debate or a discussion? Pretty darn quickly if any of you are like myself. So a lot of the time, just being very vigilant and aware of the purpose of the law and the purpose of the gathering will help and on the front end. But to the extent there are any planned gatherings, always good to make sure you're checking on whether any of those potential factors could be in play, whether a meeting could in fact occur. Meetings of governmental bodies must be preceded by public notice and must be held in open session unless a closed session is expressly permitted by law. There are several closed session exceptions in the Iowa Code. if there is ever a question as to whether a closed session applies, of course, you will want to consult with legal counsel. With the exception of meetings that are expressly authorized to be held in closed session, all actions and discussions at meetings, whether they're formal or informal, need to be conducted and executed in open session. Each governmental body is required to keep minutes of all of its meetings as well. What are the notice requirements? We talk about what notice of a meeting. The notice has to include by state law the time, date, and place of each meeting and the tentative agenda of each meeting. That notice and the language of the agenda items included has to be designed in a manner reasonably calculated to apprise the public of that information. Notice should be posted on a bulletin board or other prominent place that's easily accessible to the public. Cedar Falls does a terrific job of posting agenda and packet material on its website that's incredibly user-friendly. That is one way to ensure that the public has notice of a public meeting. But notice must also be provided to news media who have requested that information as well. When must notice be given? At least 24 hours in advance of the start of the meeting. And with all the holiday seasons that we all encounter, that's important to keep in mind as well. From Memorial Day all the way through the Christmas holiday, we always have those days where that 24-hour rule is going to result in needing to have agenda items placed on the agenda much earlier than what you might normally have had there not been a holiday involved. So unless there is good cause, which would not mean forgetting that there is a holiday, but would mean potentially, notice is impossible or impractical. As much notice as is reasonably possible shall be given. But that exception is construed very, very narrowly. And so really, if there isn't the ability to meet that 24-hour advance notice requirement, the matter should really be held over until the next council meeting.
I could tell you in 25 years of doing this, I don't think I've ever used that exception where we, second one, unreasonable, whatever it is on the PowerPoint, or impractical. So as it relates to the agenda, where you can place something on without 24 hours notice, I find it personally, it causes too many issues. It causes too many issues for the city and for the council, that if we have to call a special meeting, then we do it and we get the appropriate notice out there. So I can't think of really any good situation where that might be applicable.
No. It's not worth being the test case to litigate about it. So we'll put it that way. It's not worth it. There are provisions really specifically pertaining to, for example, emergency, like emergency repair work. That's not going to be an agenda issue. Emergencies have their own code sections applicable to the specific topic that you're dealing with. So really and truly, Mike is right on. That good cause or impossible and practical standard is not one that you want to wind up litigating. So I mentioned earlier that the City Council also must maintain minutes of each of its meetings. The minutes are required to show the time, date, place, and members present at the meeting, and it has to show the result of each and every vote that is taken. The minutes have to have sufficient information to indicate the vote of each member and what that vote was. All votes have to be made in public, in open session, so voting by secret ballot in any circumstances is prohibited. So we also mentioned there are some examples of, or there are some specific exceptions called closed session. There are times when the City Council is authorized to go into closed session and discuss certain matters, not in a public meeting setting. So the rule is that meetings are held in open session unless a closed session is permitted. So the rule is not, is there a closed session that applies? If so, we must go into closed session. And in fact, the statute itself specifically says that there is nothing that requires a closed session on any of the topics covered in the closed session code sections. However, the law does recognize that there are policy reasons, important policy reasons, why some discussions should occur, perhaps outside of an open meeting. And they are for very limited reasons. Iowa Code Section 21.5 lists some possible reasons for going into closed session. Nothing in the law, like I said, requires it. The council can always choose to remain in open session, but all final action must be taken in open session. The closed session can only occur by affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members of the body. So that would be 2/3 of the members of either the City Council, or if it's a specific public committee, an appointed committee, that 2/3 vote of the members of that committee. or by all members present at the meeting. The reason for the closed session, for holding it, must be announced on the record, however. By virtue of our notice provisions we just discussed, the reasons should be included and listed on the agenda as well to provide adequate notice to the public as to the reason for a potential closed session. The closed session has to be recorded, and minutes of that closed session must be taken. The recording and the minutes are required to be maintained for at least a year, unless there's some other code section that applies.
Goodbye.
That require a longer retention period. I'm going to pause there just in case we lost somebody who needs to be on with us. Okay. All right. So before I leave closed session, I want to make sure I've covered everything. I don't know whether, yeah, we won't have a whole lot more after this. So are there any questions specific to notice or closed session?
Looks like we're good.
Just a couple
Oh.
things that I would suggest to the council as it relates to closed session. I think in my years being working with the city, you have done a very nice job of complying with the open meetings and going into closed sessions when only it is applicable. The law does talk about this idea of things being open, okay? But I will tell you, when we start talking about, or when the council has to evaluate personnel, or there's potentially hiring or firing decisions. Under Iowa Code 21.51I, it talks about the ability to have it in closed session. And it takes that individual who's the issue that you may be addressing agreement to go into the closed session. We always advise, even though we talk about and the law talks about that you could do that in public, we suggest very strongly that you request if that individual wants it in a closed session, because the potential for defamation claims or other things along those lines, if they're not allowed to have that in a closed session, become very great and exposes the city to substantial liability. Also, we remember in closed sessions, we don't take any votes. It is a consensus. If you're giving staff direction, if you're giving me direction, when we're doing collective bargaining, things like that, it's a consensus of the council of moving forward for a process that will ultimately result in whatever action or things that we're looking at doing coming back to the council for a full discussion and then a final vote by the council. So I just wanted to add a couple of those things to keep in mind when we're talking about closed sessions. Overall, I think the city of Cedar Falls does a very, very good job on it.
Yeah, and that's one of the many, very important policy goals that the legislature has when designing the closed session exemptions. Another, for example, is discussions of real estate transactions. So, another would be discussions with legal counsel about a matter that is pending in court. Those are really important policy goals that are implemented through closed session and times where, even though some discussion may occur in closed session, actual formal action and discussion can occur in open meeting as well when the time comes. So, general rules of conduct at meetings. We get this question sometimes whether the public may use cameras or recording devices at open meetings. That is permitted by, and nothing in Chapter 21 prevents the governmental body from making or enforcing reasonable rules for conduct at its meetings, and to assure that those meetings are orderly and free from interference or interruption by members of the public or spectators. So, public comment is only required under Iowa law to be allowed at public hearings. There are other times through rules of conduct, applicable rules of conduct, or just council policy that public comment would be allowed at other times as well. So really, again, with the goal setting and policy goal setting meetings, having, reviewing those matters, that would be a correct time to review rules of conduct for meetings. Iowa Code Section 21.6, so the Open Meetings Law also has penalties for violation. And that can include damages against those who participated in the unlawful meeting, unless there is a valid defense. And that damages can be up to $2,500 in some circumstances. Costs and reasonable attorney fees can be paid, must be paid by those who participated in an unlawful meeting if a court were to rule that it was an unlawful meeting. Or if there's a valid defense, then by the government itself. Actions taken in violation of additional penalties are that any action that is taken in violation of the open meetings law could be voided. A member could be removed if there's been a prior violation. And then a court could also issue an injunction against further violations of the law. It's important to note that our courts have made clear that ignorance of the law is not a defense. So that has not.
And remember now we have IPIP, the Iowa Public Information Board, that is the administrative agency that is taking over a lot of these complaints and will investigate those and provide remedial action. Obviously, there's the court ways to get through court, or they may enforce it through court if they find out that there is a violation. I also want to remind the council, and I'm sure you're doing this, but this is always a good thing. I can remember, I'm going to age myself, where this council had the various committees. Then we went away from the various committees to just the council meetings and committee of the whole. And now it's my understanding that we've reinstituted the committees. Those are committees created by council. You must comply with all public meetings as it relates to each one of those committees and those committee meetings. I'm sure you're doing it, but let's just make sure that when you get a lot of committees going, that we're always mindful that we have to comply with the various tenets of the open meetings law.
All right. Are there any final questions from any council members up here? Well, with that, I'd like to thank Michael and Maria from Allers and Cooney for your time and explanations. We really appreciate you coming up here, spend time with us. And we're going to have a quick 30-second switch around because I'm going to have Council Member Kelly Dunn come over here and lead the administration committee meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right on time.
Okay, now we'll move on into the Administration Committee. We've got two presentations tonight. The first presentation is from Grow Cedar Valley and their annual update that they give us. So, looks like we'll start with Carrie Dara.
You must be JCV, I'm guessing. There you go. Okay.
Very good. Thank you. Good evening. It's great to be here, and as always, we really do appreciate the time that you allow for Grow Cedar Valley to give our most current update. Our board chair, as you know, is Becky Gwynn, who's the factory manager for John Deere Waterloo. She's out of the country, so she's not able to join us tonight, but Lisa and I are here to provide the most current information and answer any questions that you may have. Staying strong and working with the Cedar Valley community has been our highest priority, and I'm extremely proud of our team and our partners who continue to collaborate and connect to make sure we keep our economy growing. A packet was provided for you, I believe, and hopefully you've had a chance to review it. But you will hear more specific updates from Lisa after I share a few comments. Our commitment to the City of Cedar Falls remains providing economic development services through marketing and cultivating leads from the state, IEDA, Iowa Economic Development Authority, exploring and expanding innovation practices with our existing businesses and industries to grow the current economy, and across the board, with every business, industry, and sector prioritize workforce growth and development initiatives. And I know all of you from the sectors you represent are going through the same kinds of exploration with talent recruitment and retention, and we're there with you to help in the ways that we can. So before I turn it over to Lisa, though, I do want to share, if you haven't heard the news of the expansion going on in the building that we're located at TechWorks, Hawkeye Community College will be constructing on the entire second floor of the Tech 1 building their advanced manufacturing piece that's going to be the SACA Center, the Smart Automation Certification Center. While this will be located at TechWorks campus in Waterloo, it will have a regional impact. And so it's important for all of you to understand and be well informed about what's going on there. It's a huge, huge workforce development effort for the Cedar Valley, and we're really, really pleased to be part of that in the form of that we're moving, that we're getting out of the way so that they can have the space that we're in, so they can have the entire second floor. So that expansion will support that, create that new training center. This will be a high-tech tech facility that will be training and preparing the future workforce in automation and robotics. And that will begin, they'll start construction July 1st. They will begin in their training center January of 23, so coming right up. This will be one of only a handful of these centers in the country. So it's again, it's going to be huge for the manufacturing community, of which Black Hawk County has more manufacturers than any other county in the state of Iowa. So it's huge for that sector of our economy. Many of them are located in Cedar Falls, as you know, so this is a great, great economic development and workforce development effort, and we couldn't be more pleased to, again, it's a small sacrifice for us to move our office. We'll be moving up a floor. We'll be consolidating with a couple other businesses and co-locating. We're more than happy to do that because it absolutely will help move the needle on what we know is important on workforce development moving forward. So with that, I'll turn this over to Lisa, our Vice President of Economic Development. We're both going to be around if you have any questions. So Lisa, here you go. That's for you. If you could run it.
Good evening. Thanks for having us again today. This is our semi-annual update, so we appreciate it. And the updates, the work we do at Gross Cedar Valley, as Carrie said, it's more than just the two people speaking to you tonight. It's the entire team, regardless of position. And we're really proud of the team and the collaboration we do internally to deliver these services, not only to Cedar Falls, but the entire Cedar Valley community. Let's see. That's a little bit, there we go. I got bumped, that's okay. What you're seeing right here is, since our last update, we continue on our lead generation initiatives, targeting the Netherlands at the beginning of the year. At the end of the year, we had identified and had virtual meetings with 6 companies based in the Netherlands. Because of the interest that seemed to be there from the list of 1,500 companies that we still were working through, we decided to continue with the same initiative into the new year by adding, our goal was 4 additional leads from the 1,500, the database of 1,500 companies that we have up there. As you can see, we are looking at, we're targeting companies that wanted to establish commercial distribution centers in the United States, as well as durable and non-durable goods in manufacturing. As you will note in the chart on the left-hand side, the responses of most of these companies to our outreach, the companies were identified, the 1,500 companies were identified based on increased sales over the last 5 years as a measurement of growth. As you will note, 377 companies did not respond to the multiple outreaches we did through phone calls and emails, and then another 302 companies responded that they did not have any plans for expansion in the U.S. The list we were able to generate in total was 7 leads from the database of 1,500. Since this report, we have had an 8th virtual meeting scheduled for later this month. At this point, we are going to be closing this lead generation initiative. We feel that out of the 1,500 we've been working through over the last 6 months, that we've exhausted it. So we're going to close this lead generation initiative and focus on a new database coming up July 1st, the beginning of our fiscal year. We are working on which industry sectors to focus on right now, and geographically the focus will be domestic lead generation instead of international. We are doing distribution for sure, as well as food processing. Those will be included. And we're doing research right now this month to identify specific manufacturing subsectors to also include. The domestic lead generation will be cross-targeted to C-level executives through LinkedIn to better increase our chances for success. On the right-hand side, you'll see what we call Project Engage. GCV is monitoring the interactions on our economic development web pages to track which companies are engaging with certain pages and how long they're staying on. those pages. So in addition to identifying those companies, we're reaching out after the fact and through phone calls and emails to the C-level executives to identify whether these companies have interest in expansion. To date, and this is a fairly new initiative, we've been able to have one meeting with a company who has long-term plans for growth in possibly the Midwest and Iowa. And that was from a list of 81 companies who visited our website. As you can see, economic development lead generation has always been a numbers game, but as we move through the national and global economic times we're in, external lead generation has become more challenging in our industry, and we haven't been the only part of the country that has experienced that. That's nationwide. Well, we have good relationships with site selection consultants, and we're pretty proud of them that we've built that up over the last several decades. We're planning to spend more time in their space as people change within their industry and others retire. And that's particularly interesting because what we found is that their industry, their niche market is pretty small, and they've been experiencing, like everyone else, employees jumping from one ship to the other. So it's important for us to stay track of which site selection consultants are with which firms so we can effectively represent Cedar Falls and the Cedar Valley. To that end, we've been participating this past year in virtual table talks, the last one being in April. We're able to interface with 7 consultants. And this interface with the site selection consultants is so valuable right now. It helps us understand changes in corporate site selection and also gives us a chance to pitch our location for future projects that they're working on. We applied and were accepted earlier this month to participate in Site Selectors Guild Partnership Program, which aims to really build a stronger relationship between economic development organizations and the industry's top site selection consultants. And we think through being a formal partner with the Site Selection Guild, it will help open doors for Cedar Falls for networking too as we begin this next fiscal year. We have 39 companies on our list that we are trying to meet with in Cedar Falls. It can be a mutual outreach and typically centered around wage rates, consumer price index, training, or tapping non-traditional workforce that might be overlooked. Of the 11 new projects, 10 were external and 1 came from an existing business since we last gave you an update. While Cedar Falls Shane does an excellent job with representing the real estate component with these leads, both external and internal, we complement those prospect proposals with information on specific data related to workforce, supply chain, and overall regional economy, including tax structure changes within the state of Iowa. Iowa Manufacturers Supplier Connection Portal. This is something fairly new, but it has been in the works by the state of Iowa for the last 2 years. Last month, we were able to participate. We were invited by the Iowa Economic Development Authority, to be more direct about it, to host a webinar for manufacturers to register on this new statewide supplier connection portal that IEDA created to help Iowa manufacturers connect with each other and support the greater supply chain in the state. And the response so far has been good. We will continue to push it because we realize that not everyone saw the webinar or even the recording we share afterwards. So this is part of our interaction when we continue to discuss this portal with Cedar Falls manufacturers during our existing business visit. Ignite training, Carrie went through that really well, so I won't repeat anything, but it's a great program. And already there have been business manufacturing partners that jumped on board over a year ago. When the Ignite program started, companies like Iowa Laser and Creighton Engineering, for example, that come to mind. So it does mean a lot for our manufacturers, including those in the Cedar Falls Industrial Park. Cedar Falls Manufacturers Association, some of you might remember this. In March, we restarted it. We're doing that in support along with Hawkeye Community College, UNI, and ISU Cirrus. We began partnering with this is going to be, in the past, it's been led by these organizations, but we saw that in order for it to succeed and have any scale, it needs to be led and run by the manufacturers themselves. We're there as a support entity. All of us, educational and nonprofits, are there just to provide that additional support that they look to us to do. So as I said, this is an industry-led association that will prioritize common issues for the industry. Right now, it's being led by 10 manufacturers, and they plan to expand that membership later this year. They're in the process of identifying what those priority areas are. They're meeting with lower education educators and talk about how they can better align their skill needs, manufacturing skill needs, with getting that information to students, potential students that might be interested in careers with manufacturing. So much work that needs to be done, but both entities are willing to sit down, and we do have the individuals involved are C-level executives directly, so they feel it worthwhile to spend some time in this area to make sure that everything aligns and everyone's heading in the same direction. Some of you might have heard about this, Cedar Valley Magazine. Many of you are familiar with Live the Valley website and the job board and the companion publication. We have published for at least 3 editions, Live the Valley Magazine. That's a talent retention and recruitment piece that we give to our employers as they're trying to recruit new individuals to their operations here. This time around, we're collaborating with Livability Media to create a new quality of life publication that will debut by the end of this year. Livability Media has already partnered with the Iowa Economic Development Authority on a similar statewide magazine, which is part of the state's marketing initiative called This is Iowa. Livability Media has partner relationships with the national media as well that will help promote the state, but also Cedar Falls as a place to work and live. So we think that this step is where we need to be, not only the collaboration, but combining resources so we can get Cedar Falls and the rest of Cedar Valley seen on a national platform. The Cedar Valley Magazine will be an annual publication. We did Live the Valley Magazine that was done every other year, but this will be an annual publication. And we have a commitment with Livability Media for the next 3 years. Copies will be distributed to hospitals, hotel, motels, businesses, Visitors Bureau, and it will be free. Our goal was to get ad sponsorship for this initial publication of at least $50,000 in ads, just because people weren't familiar with this publication, and it was a bit of a change we were doing that companies were used to previously. So our minimum goal was $50,000 to raise, and our stretch goal was $100,000 in ads sold. Happy to say that we met our stretch goal. So it really illustrates the businesses, nonprofits, educational institutions that really thought that this particular publication will help them recruit and retain talent. So we're pretty excited about it. Livability right now is currently working on writing the content and putting together the pictures. They'll take their own pictures, so there'll be quality photos. And we hope to see the draft by the end of the summer. Last Friday, we bid on several joint marketing initiatives that IEDA is leading over the next 12 months. Some of these initiatives marry up with ours quite well. This includes participating with content in Wired Magazine, Harvard Business Review. I'm mixing that in because that's really going to be a platform where we can support and promote our certified industrial parks, including the new one in Cedar Falls that's coming online soon. And then also, Harvard Business Review also publishes a weekly newsletter targeted to young professionals called Ascend. That will be one of our talent initiatives, opportunities to market there as well. And then we're also looking at a banner ad in Iowa's This is Iowa website and related social and digital media campaigns. And we put a pretty long wish list together to participate in IEDA's program, and we hope by next month we'll know which IEDA initiative we will be invited to participate in. It's first come, first served, so we respond to it the morning we got the email that it opened up. And we hope that this will be a great opportunity for us to promote the Livability Magazine and content even more on digital social media. The newcomer event, we received good feedback and participation from a group, about 20 people who attended this first event. This event helps individuals new to the community assimilate with activities and opportunities in the Cedar Valley and surrounding areas. We will have another event later this fall in Cedar Falls. This event is free and family friendly. And thank you, Mayor Green, for attending and being one of our ambassadors. a few weeks ago, and the Cedar Falls Tourism Bureau for helping us market the event and making it successful as well. So moving forward, we will continue to look at those partners to help it make it successful and grow it. And just lastly, here are some of the additional benefits the city realizes through your investment in Grow Cedar Valley. You'll see here over the last 12 months, your city online listing on Grow Cedar Valley's website had 320 visitors. And since our last update, the ambassadors had 7 ribbon cuttings in Cedar Falls. I do have to mention a special one, and this was nearly 3 years in the making, is ribbon cutting for Zyberg's new distribution center in Cedar Falls Industrial Park. And it was kind of definitely a nice event, and it came on the heels of the parent company, Zyberg Frontline Systems in the Netherlands, celebrating their 40th anniversary. Carrie and I are available for questions, but we also welcome conversation about any of these initiatives that we're doing and any other initiatives you feel that Grow Cedar Valley should be looking at or should consider. So right now I'll open this up to questions if you have any questions for me or Carrie at this point.
Thank you for the presentation, and I know you guys have been working really hard to continue to push economic development in Cedar Valley, so thanks.
Thank you.
I guess I don't have any questions. I echo Councilman Harding. You know, we all have our roles, I feel like, in our community. I just feel blessed to have very smart, well-versed people giving their time and talents to our community, the Cedar Valley community, especially at this time. I mean, if anybody's in the workforce, it feels like it's more important than ever to have you folks advocating for us. So thank you.
We appreciate it. You know, I talk to colleagues all across the country here struggling with the same thing, and it's a topic of conversation with these site selection consultants. So we're all in an even playing field right now, but not everyone will finish at the same level coming out of this. So it's our intent to be on the top end, developing the best practices, and being able to pull ourselves away from the crowd by doing it better. Thank you.
I have a question. Exactly how many businesses have you brought to Cedar Falls this year? Do you know off the top of your head?
Brought to Cedar, you mean leads or
No, I mean
companies
actual
closed?
businesses that have come here.
None that we have been involved with.
What about last year?
Last year, it's been pretty slow for the last couple of years, so no. We brought leads, as I mentioned in the report, 10 external leads. But
no
a lot of times we start with these leads and then they are put on hold or pause. There was one, for example, that we had a visit. We were 5 on the short list, and we had 2 sites in the Cedar Valley right before the pandemic, and we've continued to try to reach out to them to see if they'd restart it, and we're still in that holding pattern.
So none last
No.
year either?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question. The magazine, Cedar Valley Magazine, is that going to have an online portal that you can go into and look at past issues and that sort of thing?
Yes, it will. There'll be a digital version, so we will share that with your communications director and Shane for if you'd like to add it onto your platforms as well.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have the fiscal year 2023 cash management report by Lisa Roding. Thank you.
I am struggling with starting it. Yeah, I gotta pull it up. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
You.
Tonight, I will present the fiscal year 2023 cash management report. I will be reviewing the investments and rate of return. I'll be reviewing the cash reserves and provide a snapshot of our financial position. And I'll also be reviewing some capital expenditures. Having these set policies in place helps ensure our financial stability, and performing this financial analysis also provides valuable information on our current and future city finances. Our short-term excess funds are held in a checking account and 3 money market accounts. This past 10 months of this fiscal year, we have been able to earn $191,000 in interest on those funds. I'm sorry, I'm not hitting. Sorry. Our certificate of deposits have earned a 0.85% rate of return on average this past fiscal year, and that is up from a 0.37 for fiscal year 21. We still, this past 10 months, have seen a downturn on the rates of return, but just in the last 2 months, they have started to increase. As city, we do want to be wise stewards of our city finances and public funds, and so we want to manage those with 3 basic principles. We want to have the safety of the principal balances, making sure that we do get those funds returned if we do invest them. We also want to maintain liquidity to match the expenditures that we might have, and then a reasonable rate on the investments that we do, getting a good yield for our investments. Cash is the most liquid asset, and it is vital to our daily operations. We have 3 financial positions in order to hold cash. We do want to make sure we do meet our current obligations, such as our accounts payable to our vendors and to pay our employees' salaries. We get our largest property taxes in April and October, and so we do have to use cash reserves to go between those 6-month periods. The second reason for holding cash reserves is to protect against uncertainties, those catastrophes that might happen, whether it's a flood, a ice storm, or the pandemic, or other emergencies that might arise. The third reason for holding cash reserves is that our cash reserve balances actually go into our bond rating. When we sold bonds in 2020, we did receive an upgrade in our bond rating to a AAA rating, and this was one piece that helped us get that better rating. City has maintained cash reserves. The general fund, we received guidance from the council to maintain that reserve between the 15 and 25% in order for cash flow and emergency purposes. And in fiscal year 2003, the City Council did direct staff to move towards the upper end of that reserve, so we are reserving 20 to 25%. Prior to that, we were down at the 15% or sometimes even lower than that in a few fiscal years. We also maintain cash reserve balances in these 5 funds between 20 and 30% for refuse, 65 and 75% for the sewer fund, 20 to 30% for the street fund, 10 to 20% for stormwater fund, and the emergency reserve balance is between $1.5 million to $2 million. These again were set by City Council, directing staff to maintain these balances. Just a reminder that the first 4 funds on this slide, we are only able to spend those funds on the services that those funds do provide to the city residents. On this slide, this is a forecast of the 9 funds that are actually reviewed in this cash management report. This review, you'll see that there is the spike there for October, November, and April and May when we do receive those property taxes. And then that decline in June when we make some of those year-end capital capital expenditures, or we have the startup of our construction season. Capital expenditures are defined as those public improvements that the city does make. Those might be purchase of property or purchase of equipment. You will find a schedule of those in the report tonight on pages 50 through 54 if you'd like to review those. Departments do adhere to a scheduling process unless there is an emergency. This is the 32nd year for the vehicle maintenance program. Departments are able to extend the life of the vehicles a lot longer, taking care of them and doing the regularly scheduled maintenance. And management will budget when these vehicles are getting close to failing to make those purchases to replace them. And they try to make these purchases late in the year so they can actually, make sure we're getting the proper vehicles replaced. For fiscal year 23, we will want to keep an eye on our cash reserves. The rollback and the rollback is happening with the commercial properties coming in line with the residential properties, but then the backfill that replaced that will actually be phased out within the next 7 years. We will want to watch the national and local economies, the current inflation rates, the supply chain disruption, and the labor shortages are just some remnants of this pandemic that we've been going through the last 2 years, and we have been feeling it at the city level as well as other private sector too. I would like to thank Kathy Niebergall, our finance technician, and Director Rodenbeck for help in actually preparing the report or reviewing the report. And tonight I will seek a motion to approve the fiscal year 2023 cash management report.
Okay, thank you. And I guess this is a moment where I might need help. Do I ask for the motion first, or do we do? Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the 2023 fiscal report?
Motion to approve the FY 2023 cash management report.
Second.
Okay, motion and second.
Just for point of order, real quick. Are we referring to council at large to take action and receive and file, or are we actually approving tonight? And that was a discussion we had before. Our committee here is all 7 members, but can we take the action, or do we have to send it to the council?
I mean, I can just say what we've done in the past. Normally, we've approved it at committee, but then it'll be received and filed on the next council agenda, unless you have anything legally you want to say about that, Kevin, or?
As we discussed on another matter at a couple of committee meetings ago, and as we just heard from our legal counsel, committees are referral bodies and recommendation bodies. So I don't believe it's appropriate for approval to come from the committee. It should wait for council meeting. That's my position. I wasn't aware that motion was on the agenda for this committee meeting.
It's okay.
Okay, so we should.
Certainly, action by this committee could be to recommend approval to council, for sure.
Oh, okay. So we should consider withdrawing that motion and then asking if there is the motion for referral
Or just
or
recommendation.
recommendation.
For
Okay.
approval.
Okay.
Just add the word motion to recommend approval of the FY 2023 cash management report.
There you
Add
go.
the word.
I have a question.
Okay. First, I think we have to address the motion on the floor,
I
right?
I would second Susan's motion to recommend approval of the financial report.
Okay. Now, time for council discussion.
Do I call you Ed chair?
I think we're really informal, so you can just call me whatever you want.
Ed chair, I'll call it. I have a question about the excess funds and the hospital fund. There was nothing on this page. Why was that? I'd like to kind of know what the hospital fund is and those kinds of things, but it's been omitted for some reason. Why?
I didn't present in my report, but it is included in there. Not sure what page it is.
Well, it's on page, said it was on page 45 from the front table of contents, but 45 was intentionally left blank.
The hospital fund is actually located on page 47. That's where our certificate of deposit is labeled. We do have one CD for $4,500,000. But due to the low rates, we do have almost $7 million held in the city's money market account.
Okay, where's that on this page? It says pooled totals.
It's actually on page 47. It's a separate page.
I've got page 47. Yeah, that's not what my stuff looks like. I got the printed version, none that's on here.
That's kind of 6.8 million.
I guess I'm not sure what.
Yeah, I think the packet that we printed had the entirety of all presentations in it, so the page numbering was off is all.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, page 47 does have that 6.8 million in the city's money market account.
As long as it's there, I'll find it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions from council? Okay, well, I think
The voice.
we
take
need
the
to do a
vote now.
voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, a voice vote.
Yeah,
Oh.
It's on page 66.
Okay. All in favor of the motion on the table, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, that motion passes, and I believe that ends this report and moves us out of the administration committee. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right, thank you.